Good afternoon, good morning, all of you who have joined in to this session of today on NFT and their role in ownership, pixels, data, and code. So today we are going to have uh, three speakers who will be talking about their expertise and their interest in the subject. NFTs has become a very popular uh, subject in the last year, especially during the pandemic. A lot of people have gone in for NFTs for various reasons. But today we are going to talk more on the intellectual property, uh, especially how we could use it for the open source intellectual property ownership. Uh, how NFTs can be assigned for property ownership in open source, as well as for social media content ownership and pixel ownership, that is like digital art. NFTs
Mhm.
also have a role in the using the decentralized identities. So I will touch upon the subject also. So in the whole, we are going to talk about how NFTs are bringing to the table the committee of the foundation. And Saransh, the key speaker, is a researcher and he is part of Science Foundation. Max Maxens will be the next speaker, and then we have Prasanna Lohar, who is a blockchain and digital banking expert as well as a part of the core team of the foundation. So I would begin with asking a few questions to uh, our first speaker, which is Saransh. But before that, I would like to Saransh to introduce himself to the audience. Over to you, Saransh.
Hey, thank you, Dolly, for like such nice to meet you again after so long. And I remember you were trying to reach me in a couple of weeks ago, and I was a bit occupied with things out in the real world outside the digital world, so couldn't respond back. So hello, everyone, whoever is here. I am just, I mean, I'm doing some music these days, and I have interest in developing distributed systems. I've done some research on them like from last couple of years, and but these days I'm pretty much interested in like learning about different forms of cognition improvement techniques, which is like meditation techniques, so to speak, in a simpler languages, and how does it enhances your cognition, improves your memory, um, and improves your ability to make decisions that are good for you and for for your surroundings also. So that's a bit about me.
So, what do you think, Saransh, about NFTs and especially their role in the ownership, especially for pixels, code, and data? Maybe not in the same sequence.
Yeah, so I think by and large, uh like the the idea of NFT is a bit little vague also. I mean, what they are and how they are sort of like created. So if you look at it from a perspective of like pure tech, then I think it's a contract that is essentially says that that like it cannot be further divided. And now what you see is an extension of these contracts in the world, that the metadata that is associated with this contract. So it could be like a video, it could be like a pixel, and that's pretty hard to justify, by the way, because I believe that the whole Web3 conundrum, or what's going on, is that the idea of decentralization. So keeping that aside, but yeah, like so NFT amongst the pixelations and the data, as if you could associate, but that association is pretty hard, and one can see these days that this association that people are talking about, that on these platforms, it's the rightful ownership can never be you know resolved unless it's done through a gatekeeper, or so to speak, through people who ensure sort of a provide trust. So one example is saying that I can take a painting and of any big artist, and I can sort of like create an NFT around it. So there's no one who can actually stop me. Um, so that's sort of a problematic. But yeah, like on an underlying an underlying sort of selling point of NFTs, that it's scarce and it cannot be further divided, which is somewhere, what you could say, like somewhere a little bit um, false. But yeah, like I think it's a market timing that's happening with blockchain, and the like it's a marketing technique, that mixing the scarcity of it, and then mixing the data of it. So there are multiple problems, but I think people are coming to a conclusion that, hey, it's we want to see it that way. So I think it's conformity build, or the consensus is building. So that's the approach of, that's how I see this.
Great. I think for the benefit of all the other viewers who are not very familiar with NFT, would you like to really explain what NFT stands for, non-fungible token, what non-fungible means, and what a token means, as well as what uh, how do you use the digital currency to integrate NFTs into a financial
So
ecosystem?
So think of it from a smart contract perspective. Like Bitcoin is actually a true non-fungible, in a sense, like if you talk about Bitcoin. So I think Ethereum-based non-fungible tokens are not really non-fungible, but Bitcoin is scarce. Like for an example, there are only 21 million, um, you know, um, coin supplies, right? Which can further be divided, but they represent this division, like which is equated to one Bitcoin. For an example, 10 to the power 8 is equals to one Bitcoin. And the idea of if you put the idea of scarcity in terms of collectibles, right? So for an example, um, your your utility items, right? So like your planet, right? Or your items that we sort of source from the planet, right? So that is something in that manner, if one can sort of like understand. So in that way, it's basically scarce, right? It's non-fungibility, that it cannot be further divided. But I think that's a little bit untrue, because you can simply go and deploy another contract, and you can simply, the scarcity the idea of scarcity um, is a little bit twisted in terms of how Ethereum is propagating it, or specifically like contract based chains that are propagating, is a little bit spurious, I would say. But yeah, like if you look in a prospect from Bitcoin, right? So the idea of proof of work that goes into mining, right? So that is actually truly non-fungible, because you can't like further sort of divide it, because your process of electricity has gone, and that's actually scarce, and that proves the quantification of something, of a thermal energy, of something like that. So that's the real mapping of energy, measurable energy, that's happening without all that drama of metadata that is right now getting presented in front of us, saying that this is my art and this art cannot be further divided. That's actually false narrative that's being getting created. But like, to clarify with the user that if they are investing into an NFT, they're basically buying or sending money to a contract, nothing else. They might be buying which is a marketing trick. They might be buying a scooter. They might be buying like an art or a pixelated form of art, but you can't map it to something real. And hence, I think I would say, in that sense, if you talk about scarcity, which is sort of equated with non-fungibility, then I think true scarce, available quantifiable energy in front of right now is Bitcoin. So apart from that, it's all, again, it's a traditional, method of saying that the scarcity with this contract is associated or related in such a way. So that way, yes, so that's how sort of like NFTs,
So mostly NFTs have been popular in terms of arts or gaming arena. How do you really relate NFT in its emerging role of data ownership, that is the digital content ownership, as well as how it is being used by the open source community members for using NFT based licenses to govern the incentivization of their content creation? So we are moving towards a creator economy, and I think NFT has a big role to play in terms of being used in such a manner that it really redefines the content ownership through the NFTs. Your comments, especially, I would like you to really highlight your views on the second exchange. I believe you've been working on that. So if you could care to
so
elaborate.
yeah, so we actually started with this experiment of, I'll just basically produce a story. We started with the experiment of like creator economy, right? As you said, right? And creator economy is about bypassing the intermediary. But right now, if you see in the NFT world, there's a lot of intermediaries, and that can actually block you or remove you also, which is not the real promise as delivered or as prophesized by the decentralized community. So when you add like the ownership, so ownership is typically defined by the idea that if I am creating something, and if I'm creating if I'm creating, say, like a code or a piece of code, it's typically like signed, or like in a traditional manner, you sign a check, right? So that's your ownership basically, and one intermediary basically verifies it. So you essentially create a system where people directly trade or exchange value with each other basically, and the verification of that sort happens with the idea that it's embedded using these modern cryptographic techniques. But I personally think that the external oracle problem, right? For an example, proving that I wrote this code is typically a little bit of a problem as of right now. And I think as we are entering into the speculative phase, which is what these coins are doing right now, and the value addition is a little tighter there as compared to I mean the non speculative assets that provide. I mean, there is no need, because obviously, like, if they don't have a narrative of using cryptocurrency, so that falls short. So the idea is that when you look at the ownership, your ownership can be proved by simply creating a signature. And for that, I don't think you need NFTs. Like how GitHub does is that, for an example, if you have a code that is signed by you, so you use techniques like PGP and signing keys that basically says that and once you um, download the source code, you can simply verify who wrote this, who code, like that's how it happens even these days, right? And but when we say rewarding the real distribution, so it's basically distribution of towards the creator that's happening, like, so in that sense, there are simple and fair techniques that are available, like like how we are trying to do is that we're not basing it around any single coin. Like, so the idea is to have a peer-to-peer exchange without any coin. So if I want to listen to one party, so I should just simply host a channel between me and that party, and then simply listen to that. And again, I think blockchain doesn't inherently, I mean, solves this, because it's mostly about authorization, or move transactions are pretty much about moving the ownership essentially, and those ownerships are pretty much drilled down to the idea of what you own, and the ownership is pretty much drilling down to the ability to move those tokens, right? So hence you can definitely associate some sort of a metadata as long as the two parties are willing to agree, and that's how you can do it in open source product or projects, right? So where if let's say there are people involved in sort of like say uh, like in case of contributing towards some open source project, and these projects essentially are about writing code, let's suppose, and you end up writing something, and I mean, definitely the trail is there, that it belongs to you, and the idea is that how do you create a system, that essentially comes back to you, or like from the user who uses your product. So there's a lot of nuances, and I think it can be pretty much measured, and the ability to measure the exact usability of your code can sort of lead back to you. And I think for that, one might not necessarily have to use NFTs, but one could sort of like typically define a contract which basically says that, hey, I'm an independent developer or a computer programmer, and I'm creating something, and this is what my address is, and I own this address, and you can just simply based on proof of my work, which is the code, the amount of code that can be sort of analyzed independently, and if it's happening, and if it's happening in a bounded region, so it does not require Dolly or Bruce or anyone, typically to spend so verification needs to happen quick. If the verification is happening quick, then you can simply conclude that this identity has created this work essentially. Like, so like in mathematics, you have these algorithms that are hard to compute, but they're very easy to verify. So imagine the same situation being applied here, where the code is essentially created in such a manner that is essentially individually unique, definitely, but it's easy to verify. The results are easy to verify, and then put them like say, hey, this code does this, and so you'll always are sure. So that way you can provide some reliability, and people can kind of like in open source would want to reward people who create these systems basically.
I
So
think there is a new concept coming up on the NFT based licensing, in the sense NFT license, which is more or less a practical middle ground when it comes to the degree of monetization of open source projects. Would you like to comment on
degree
that?
of degree of monetization means like
Monetization in open source projects. So in open source projects, you have only three options. One is that you open source your work and relinquish all your rights on it, or you copyright your work and lock down your rights, but severely restricting the reach of the work. Or there could be other mechanism, which is the NFT license for a blockchain application or an art or any kind of NFT that you create by using an NFT license, where you try to track as to what is the kind of monetization happening, and some part of it really goes to the creator. Now that's something that I am really looking forward for the creator economy, because in the creator economy, creators have to get much more benefit of their. Otherwise, it's just again we are going back to the middlemen who are uh, taking all the profits, and the actual creator doesn't get a substantial share until they really own the NFT network. So the concept of NFT license is new, but I don't know how. popular it has become, or is it something that is still yet to take off?
So I think what you are talking about, like, like for an example, like relinquishing the rights to it. I mean, um, the when you say the role of these intermediaries, what is the role of these intermediaries? Can we remove these intermediaries? Like for an example, like in terms of money, to be able to transact someone, it's pretty simple. Why do we even need banks to do that? But when you talk about some work which is subjective, which is like apple versus orange, so it becomes pretty much harder, and you need an independent or sort of like a third party, to sort of like come, because it's this thing between saying that, hey, my code is worth this much. So how do you prove that? How do you essentially? And I think the provability is happening through, like in open source project, that happens through the executability, right? For an example, how many network partners are there? So there's a lot of nuances that is involved. I mean, one cannot just simply say that, hey, I own this NFT and this is my data associated to it. I would rather see it in this manner, that I own this ownership through my keys or public keys or whatever you call it, and my data is associated with it, and this is what my work, and I prove this work by virtue of putting my code or source code outside, and one is free to use it, but the creator economy, right? So when you talk about that, so they have to go through the middleman, which is GitHub right now, or even to say that they have to go through multiple entities, and then they get sort of like credited in their account. So one example is like using something like to say that, hey, I've written source code for a project and defining the public infrastructure. So when these projects come into the nature, these open source projects, they're typically public in nature, and they're typically used for public commons. So they're typically used by everyone, and the benefit is accrued by everyone. So one could simply say, and that's why they're done in an altruistic manner. So there's a bit of a force behind it, and I think converging, or benefiting the creator economy through this needs to be needs to be sort of rethink outside the NFT paradigm, because NFT like creates unnecessary burden on people to sort of like and sort of creates a false narrative at the same time. This is what my personal opinion, but one may think of it a different manner. Economies that are benefiting, or schemes that are benefiting, like universal basic income or creator economies, right, where I create something and I should simply um, so I should take more, I should take the reward or whatever and so that's pretty subjective, right? So, and I think the typically the quantification of your measurement of your work needs to happen, and that needs to sort of like happen in those standards, the independent standards that are in place right now, which are done by these middlemen, and these intermediaries are providing at least certain value, which is because, or else we won't have these calculations, or else
Distribution.
I yeah.
So it's the distribution role that they are playing, rather than the true intermediaries per se, in the sense that they are not just the people who are not adding much value. The value that they add is the distribution part of it. Unfortunately, uh, till now, most of the distribution which they are doing, they're charging a percentage of. So mostly it's art and the gaming area which has really seen a lot of use of NFT. But I'd like to see if we can have not only the source code, but also, let's say, for example, research publications. Now, researchers who spend so much of time researching a new area, and they have it published on certain platforms. Uh, the publisher really makes the money by distributing that, except for getting the backlinks of where the publication has been cited.
Right. Right.
There is no other measure that a researcher really gets to really know how popular his article has been, or get any monetization on it for the matter. And that's a very sad state, because innovation cannot breed like this. Innovation has to really kind of be rewarded at every stage. And I personally have been working very closely trying to see how we could really change that, and how NFTs could be used in that area. Any experience you have in this area?
Yes. So I mean, um, so essentially, I so talking about the scientific publication, and so we're basically like in this direction, we're developing this similar sort of tool, which is called Second Exchange, and that just simply uses the peer-to-peer protocol. Why people haven't done it? Because people are like a little bit if either people who are developing these sort of tools, they're either like open source activists, or they're either like both of the worlds. What we are trying to achieve here is that the incentivizing the operator economy, which is the people like who care about the publishing. For an example, so let's take an example of scientific papers. So rather than having the NFT, here the example is very simple. So you have content producer who like writes about the research topic, and they are basically like sharing this research topic or whatever document they have done so far to an operator, and these operators mere role is just to pass on this information to as much as possible to the distribution. And uh, and what it means is that they are not the only operators in this whole economy. I mean, you could, by virtue of becoming a simple operator, like this is what Second Exchange is relying on. So the idea is very simple. I write the content, I host the content however I want. It's hosted at my own client, and I just simply passes it through these relayers. These are peer-to-peer relayers, like how I gossip with you and you gossip it with other people. Now the thing is that relying on you, that I know that, hey, I can rely on Dolly, that if I'll tell her that this is my scientific content, and I might know, and I'll be sure that she might push this content to people who are who essentially appreciate the scientific content. So in that manner, this technology, the setup of technology we're trying to bring in out with the blogging setup, that one could just simply write, own all the content, no need to do any NFT drama, just pushes the content to relayers. So these relayers are basically publishers. Think of them as publishers. And you can have multiple publishers striving for the content from the creators rather than the opposite. So you do not have to go to the publisher. The publishers come to you, say that, hey, your content we want because we have this much of distribution. And the content creator and the publishers, or the operators, so to speak, these operators are specifically tech people who are hosting these relayers. Relayers are essentially like, I send some data to you and you just pass it on to other people. So the other people hence have the ability to become the publishers and operators also at the same time, if they're willing to, if they see if they care to monitor, you know like uh, if they care about that topic. So let's say Dolly specifically cares, just to pure example, Dolly and Saransh and Bruce. Bruce likes the content of climate change. So Saransh is someone who publishes the content of climate change. But Bruce is far away from like listening, or so to be able to add the topic of from the Saransh. And Dolly has a infrastructure or a service that she spins up a software or a computer that basically connects Bruce, and the Bruce is able to now listen to Saransh's climate change views through Dolly. And now Dolly can set up a deal with Saransh that, hey, Saransh, I'm passing on your message to Bruce, or to people like Bruce. Why don't you start paying me something, because I'll keep up my servers or infrastructures for like this much of time. So we basically created a censor resistant platform where any information can be relayed, essentially. And it protects in a lot of manner, because protection is required at these surveillance and times of censorship. And at the same time, ownership is only regarded because ownership is belonging to Saransh, since Saransh is signing these documents by his own public or private keys, which belongs or resides with Saransh. So problem solved. You don't need NFT, and then you can simply use these agreements or contracts in place, basically, that if you, and eventually then Dolly can basically say that, hey Saransh, I'm going to pass your content to thousands of people. Why don't you give me some cut what you make? So it's the opposite, basically. And I think that can, you know, work essentially.
That's great. I think the difference between a relay and NFT, we need to really kind of have a better understanding if we really want to utilize this for uh,
Relay is like a soft.
the
Relay is like a computer. I mean, relay is more like a, like,
yeah,
think of it like this.
I can understand it's more like what we do in terms of share or in terms of sharing with the purpose to really kind of amplify the product. So, do you
Mm-hmm.
think communities are going to help in terms of really using the approach of creating a community where there are like-minded people, both users as well as the people who would be creating that content? Some kind of community network which will leverage the transaction from the creator to the, because this is what is currently happening in metaverse and other places where you are trying to really create something and post it to a community, maybe the Facebook community or some community, and currently the publisher, that's Facebook owners or the Meta, is basically making money, not the creator of the content. I mean, they are just sharing it, and there are a lot of people who are viewing it or consuming it, or brands are using it to reach out to a whole lot of people who are there in that community. But the creators really are not able to leverage that. Uh, do you think we can have a similar model as what Facebook and others have, and using NFTs as a means to the monetization?
Yes, I think we have to break down these intermediaries. These large intermediaries needs to be break down.
So, what's the kind of steps that you think will make it happen in the open source communities? Because at this point of time, there are a lot of open source communities. Today,
So
Wikipedia has
I
become
can
a
I can
essential
share. So,
part of
sorry, go ahead.
our information. If we want anything, we just either Google it or we go to Wikipedia to see more content around it. However, the monetization still doesn't happen for the creators. Now, I think we need to really seriously, especially the researcher communities and community of innovators, need to see how we could bring together some platform or some mechanism and see if NFTs fit in to really bring that happen. And that is where I'd like to really have your role in terms of what kind of roles do you see in terms of the fintech or distributed financial identity, DeFi, especially for exchange of information. Like, for example, I need the documents which are related to that particular property, and those
Mm-hmm.
could be kind of kept in a a platform which can be used by bankers to really um, uh, leverage that, rather than having a cumbersome process of really going through a whole lot of it takes about 5 to 10 days to really have physical documents and things like that before you can get into the actual transaction. Whereas I
Hmm.
think there is a very good possibility of using blockchain and NFTs uh, for doing that, especially when you have the banking network or a fintech layer at the back end, which is ready to kind of uh, help you in the transaction. So, what are your thoughts on that area, especially since you already have been working in this area um, with your
So there are
product in the fintech
I
domain?
would say there are like some two. Yeah, so there are some product, I mean, use cases that you can sort of explore, like using DIDs. I've been writing some documentation or using decentralized identifiers, and they don't require any NFT of that sort. So, and they're very easy to use also. Like, for an example, you can have like anyone can that by themselves create their own identities, and those identities can resolve their documents. So like one could just publish their Aadhaar and verify using the OTP at their own end, and then basically upload these sort of like not on any platform but on their own devices, right? So, and simply use some sort of a cryptographic signatures to prove that it belongs to them. Simple. And then verifier credentials can come in place where the let's say a banker wants to, or a bank would want to use these identity documents for someone, and they can simply resolve the identity by a given user while they're purchasing a service, and they can simply, using the semantic codes, saying that, hey, resolve this identity of this particular. So it happens completely in a decentralized manner. There is no single party that holds these documents. A person or a identity owner directly holds the document, and it gets relayed through these multiple peers, and the banks can sort of like attest by looking at this document and say, hey, we verified this document for on behalf of this particular customer, so that the identity gets verified and gets added or indexed as a credential that can be utilized later on by these banks. So these are the, I've recently written about this, and this is a very pretty much simpler approach in terms of banks. And I think banks are getting a little bit complicated these days, and obviously they need. I've been thinking about this idea where you could have just on a peer-to-peer manner, from one end, you just relay as Saransh that, hey, I want to open a bank account, and these operators in a pool could be anyone like me and you. They can just simply fetch and say that, hey, we can provide you service on behalf of this. So it's semantic. Obviously, it's very easy, but it is definitely possible in a very simple, low level of tech stack. You know.
So I think this is something that during my interaction with Prasanna during the DCB Bank Innovation Carnival hackathon, we actually worked on one of the hackathon winners was working on this of using this the documents as a collateral for SMEs for SME lending, and pretty quick using blockchain. And this thing, it was not NFT driven though, but it was more towards this thing. But if it is NFT driven, then we can possibly kind of uh, actually use that as a then it's the scarcity. That means you nobody else could be kind of selling that particular despite the fact that it might be on the blockchain, but there might be others who can actually use it on another blockchain. So if you really define it as an NFT, uh, the chances of multiple people using the same property as a mortgage to different banks could be possibility. So these are some use
Actually,
cases that
you
I
don't
think.
you don't need to define. Sorry, you don't need to define anything. Like as NFT, because verified credentials are already proving that, no, right? So, for an example, if your trade or your ownership has been removed, so you don't no longer own that particular property. A resolution, or essentially a registrar who resolves that particular piece of asset, right, on behalf of you, which is an intermediary right now, or a state.
Yeah.
They just use these DIDs, sort of like DID is a very interesting concept, and it's recommended by W3C. consortium, and Twitter's new company, like Jack Dorsey's new company, they're building on the basis of TID. And I've just shared this FinScale documentation that we are probably going to use this, and probably this could be a nice use case if we can document it around FinScale and can see, you know. So
Absolutely. I mean, I think there is a lot that's happening in the gaming sector right now, and also RBI is experimenting with at least one thing that I am aware of because I have been a direct recipient of that particular. So, a lot of international companies are storing the information of the customers and having repeat kind of payments on the credit card that.
mhm,
May not have been actually approved of because you had bought something by a foreign product vendor,
mhm,
and you're using it for having multiple transactions on the same product every month, maybe automatically. So this was a problem I think was reported by a lot of people, and RBI has now come up with using tokenized system where the tokens have to be approved by the person who is making sure that that information is not stored on the servers of the vendor, and until
mhm.
and unless the there's no way that you can take the credit card. For example, I was using a Zoom service and I wanted to disconnect my internet connection from the server. So I had to use
Can't hear you, Dolly.
I think I have a problem with my network a little bit, but I think I'm back now. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Hello. Yeah. So these are some of the things that I think using a blockchain network really definitely gives us this thing. But yes, how much can we really do the tokenization through an NFT is a big question mark. It's more of a question of using the blockchain network and the blockchain tokens for the purpose. But to make that happen in the banking scenario, especially, I think there is a lot of effort which is happening, and it's it's a good time to really be in there to really look at the use cases which the government has been experimenting and see how we could really leverage and package it in such a manner that the misuse cannot happen, and that is where uh, my
I think
interest always has been.
misuses do not happen in a manner like where I think technology doesn't really protect the misuses. The too much barricading uh, creates misuses because people try to find out different methods to evade. And I mean, definitely I mean, I would say that we use the wrong word misuse, but I would say, in my opinion, the words could be like rephrased as manner, like say, hey, how one can prevent or get out of the system essentially. And I think honestly, Dolly, like the token economics of the system these days was never meant to use as speculative asset. It's just to use to protect the network. And the banks, I mean, I don't know, fortunately or unfortunately to say that, but it's a complexity which these banks or financial institutions are adding to them. But everybody wants to take the so
See, bank gets the benefit of the transaction, and they are more only interested in transaction. However, the customer might actually not need a service, and you, since you have given the permission for tokenization, they are just misusing it by making you kind of just agree to it. I mean, these are a few things which are not right, in the sense that I don't want to use the service. I am just wanting to close that account. I still I'm not able to really do that. I can't even go into their site until and I say agree. I agree for
Right.
the next month payment. I mean, that's something very ridiculous. But let's move on to the gaming area, which is where a lot of things are happening, and there are a lot of people who are using gaming. Uh, do you see gaming really getting into the NFT this thing? Because whatever I have read, don't have any practical experience, but there is a new concept where you are basically using NFTs to uh, you can purchase NFTs and use it for the gaming purpose, and the unused tokens, unused NFTs be reused in another games. And also, what is very interesting to note is that these gaming companies are now actually pre-selling games even while they are developing it, and also getting funded for it. So there are a lot of startups who have built their games based on this particular concept of uh, pre-selling the NFTs and um, uh, actually getting funding on that basis. And once they have a sizable number of pre-sold customers of the NFTs that they are producing for their games, they're going to marquee investors and saying, "Oh, look, this is the kind of potential my product has, and why don't you really kind of value me accordingly?" And they're getting funded on that basis. So any thoughts on that? Do you think that's going anywhere, or do you think that's still a fad is currently happening and it might not really go a long way?
I think it's a facade and it will soon fizzle away because the valuations are basically happening on the idea that the people will kind of like pay and people will like, jump into the token wagon. So, yeah, like it's pretty easy for me and you to create a token and say that it has certain value. And that's where the market is. And I think it feels like pre-ICO phase, in 2017. I think it's just similar to that. What happened in the market, in the blockchain market specifically, when you talk about NFT and everything, and you can see there are inherent problems that are being cropped up. So yeah, like to me, it looks like a facade, but until unless you know, so yep, that's the idea from my side.
A lot of I mean, in the recent past, I think there are two or three companies that I have really heard of where they have been able to get huge amount of funding for their video games, which is through a concept what they call pay to play to earn concept, which is where they are making money. There is a gaming platform called Axie Infinity, where
Hmm.
the video games are incorporating NFTs, and
Hmm.
uh, some of the startups have really leveraged that to really get funded. So, and this is the VC investments coming at a huge valuation, huge valuation. But as you say, that it might still be a fad, but this is where metaverse and Web 3.0 technologies are kind of luring the youth, especially the people who are hooked to the games. And whether it is video games or whether it is these play to earn kind of games where you
Definitely.
earn by mining these NFTs.
Right, definitely. There is a lot of things going on, yeah, like in this Web3.
Yeah. So I think I couldn't see any of them joining. Ankit says Max has expressed his inability to join in because he has some is not feeling well. But Prasanna, I don't think has joined till now or given any information. So I think we'll call it a day today, and I think we have had a lot of
With
discussion around NFTs. I am a much clearer on NFTs than I was before, and I hope the audience also has gained something out of the conversation. Uh, so let's see. Maybe we have a next session where we can go more into details of the gaming part, which Max was supposed to take care, and also in terms of the banking area. I think Prasanna has done a lot of work, and I would have loved to really have his comments on how he sees NFTs really working in the banking sector, not just the fintech, but the core banking or the banking arena for various kinds of transactions,
Mhm.
from lending to uh, mortgage and a lot of other things, which are there are huge possibilities. Which it's a sky is the limit if we really kind of put our work in actual uh, practice. Unfortunately, half of the time, most of the innovations, the adoption is very poor.
Mhm.
Technologies have the potential, but if you don't have the big players adopt it, it doesn't really reach to a stage of maturity very soon. And I think it's an interesting time to be in. And thank you very much for your time. And I hope we will have a pleasure of really having you again on the session that we plan.
Mhm.
And with that, I'd like to, if you have your last comments on the topic, just just check if there are any questions.
I don't know. Maybe I'll just play some flute if you guys want to
Yeah.
hear before we end this, like the ending sessions, flute and
Sure. So I think um, there are a few questions which are already there. I think we have somebody who is asking about there is a fundraising campaign for blockchain school, and this is something that he's sharing, that this is a NFT project for a fundraising campaign.
mm-hmm.
So uh, this is interesting, but it's a pretty creative campaign. It's a good use case, and I think we also have some of the young people who have just commented in terms of uh, that they would like to really attend the actual session rather than just the session which is online, in terms of as a spectator they would like to participate. So that's a very interesting comment. So maybe we need to really look at how do we really facilitate that.
Facilitate in what do we mean?
I think most of the others are comments, not much of a question per se.
Mm-hmm.
So, any parting thoughts before we close the session, Saraj?
I think I would say Web3 is a little bit of a marketing thing. It's not pretty much like how it is what these guys are promoting it. It's decentralized. It's not. Decentralization is never about trusting a single party. It's about distributive network, and it's a marketing thing which Web3 is going through. So, and I hope people who participate in these token based projects do their own research. And I think, like, originally it is turning out to be that it's in the hand of, again, few people. I mean, why complicate when banks are working fine, And it's a lot of complication, obviously, which is what you mentioned. The tech adoption is a pretty much complicated part of it, and if and I think one could enjoy in creating these economies, and as long as it's direct or removes the intermediaries right in between, so makes sense. Or else then again we're recreating the same thing, whatever valuations or whatever amount of money goes into it. So
Right. I think there's a lot of a lot of fluidity at this point of time, if I may summarize the way you put it,
mhm.
in the whole process. And there's going to be a lot of churn, and a lot of people are going to be washed out, and there are a lot of people who will actually not be able to really provide the real value. But there's a lot of hope. So, with that, I'd like to end. Again, thanks to all the participants who logged in to really view this session. Uh, we'll look forward to any comments or feedbacks that you have. The channel will still be open on LinkedIn for comments for another couple of days before we close it. And thanks, Saranj.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Bye for the day.
Bye for the day. Thank you, everyone.